Hello. The room is getting empty. I saw some people going to the airport. Anyway, so we are down to the last plenary of this year's science exchange, and thank you so much for staying all the way to the end. So I'm going to invite Claudia Ringler, who's IFPRI's Deputy Division Director, Environment and Production Technology Division. She's going to take us through the next panel. Thank you. Closing panel.
Thank you for this honor. So this last panel is trying to bring together some of the findings, some of the research, I think, that we've all listened to in the last couple of days. And the overall title is Relevance of CG Gender Research in a Time of Global Crisis. Yeah, and don't want to take the thunder of our panelists, but I personally think we actually have heard quite a bit. So anyway, this is an excellent panel that I'm looking forward to, focusing on the relevance of CG gender research in a time of global crisis. And I would now like to invite our distinguished panelists. We have Margaret Mangini. She's Associate Professor of Agriculture Extension and Innovation Studies at Makerere University. So please take the stage. We have Hannah Evel, or Ewell, I don't know, Evel is good. Hannah Evel, she is advisor for Media and Gender at the Fund International Agricultural Research at GIZ. Please take the stage. And we also have Elizabeth Garner. She is a recent appointee for Gender and Social Inclusion with C4. Please also join the stage. And finally, we have Shreya Chakraborty, who is a recent appointee with the International Water Management Institute Delhi office. And what unites our panelists So for those who are still sleeping, yes, I think that's over. What unites our panelists is I don't know how to take this one. Okay, what unites our panelists here today is that they have a bit more of an outward look into CG research on gender. So because they've either joined CGIAR more recently, or they are at the university and have been looking into CGIAR, have been working with CGIAR, of course, for quite a long time, or they are a donor to CGIAR, and especially, obviously, to CGIAR gender research. So I think those are the perspectives that we have on the panel today. And again, why are we here? We are, I think, at a very critical juncture. We know that a lot of indicators for women and for girls in terms of food security, nutrition, employment, welfare, marriage, birth rate, etc., have worsened over the last several years as a result of concurrent and consecutive crises, including climate change, that's can call it the permanent crisis. We have food and energy price shocks linked to the war on Ukraine. We have the COVID-19 pandemic that has had, I think, permanent structural changes in some employment practices, migration outcomes, farming decisions. And what we have seen and what we know is that as a result of these crises, gendered indicators especially for women and girls, have worsened over time. So, for example, I think the World Economic Forum has said that, gender parity and some of the achievements that they're measuring is now, I think 100 years off rather than 30-something years off. We know that 150 million women, I think, face more women than men face nutrition, food insecurity. And so those are just some of the indicators. And so I think the question to our panelists are, from everything that you've heard over the last 3 days, is CGIAR gender research relevant to addressing these growing inequities that women and girls face? Also men, obviously, in some circumstances, and we have heard that it's important to further engagement as a part of the response. Is the research relevant? Is it sufficient? Is it reaching the right audiences? What else do we need to do? And for now, I'll let you, just give an opening statement, just of your first impressions, and then I might be digging a bit further. But please, Margaret, looks like you're ready with the mic. Let's try. I'll take this off.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and for the invitation to be on, first of all, to participate in this exchange, but also to give some remarks. In terms of relevance, the 3 C's, conflict, COVID, climate, I get a sense that the gender research has zoomed in adequately on climate. I've heard a lot about climate, hotspots, publications, information, and I saw isolated, papers on COVID. Conflict, not as much. And the other one that impressed me was the way in which knowledge management structures to ensure that what the gender researchers do is able to inform the national cultural research systems through the resource hub. The gender platform is really, I think, a game changer. I see now harmonization or systems to harmonize, coordinate, align, they're in place. I was really impressed by the sharing by Elsie, that video, and the fact that we now have a one-stop center where we can go to get information that helps us to address challenges, problems. And the thing about crisis is that they come unannounced. You need that place where you can go to get information, solve problems quickly. And I think the systems are in place. So I'll start on a positive note. I think that's good. I'll come with the rest later.
That's a very nice start, but let me just quickly, you mentioned that this resource hub platform will be of great use to national agricultural research systems who try to reduce gendered inequities in access to resources, achievements, and outcomes. So will people really go and use the platform, or is there still something missing? I mean, are you kind of an ambassador, obviously also maybe bringing students in, or are we actually there? The platform is there, will it be used?
We need to do more in terms of getting the message out. I'm now speaking from a personal perspective. There's a lot that was shared today that is there that I would need, and I know my students would need, but I didn't know was there. So I think we need to do more in terms of getting the message out, the rich resource that is there, so that people can use it. But I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of getting those resources in one place. Another good aspect is tools and methods that are tested, that are rigorous, so that the CG can be the global leader, thought leader in these processes. I think that's also positive in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. So over to Hannah.
Yeah. So thank you also. It's a real honor to have been asked to speak on this panel. Like Margaret, I also want to start on a positive note. And I think I really want to, but a lot of what I'll say is positive, but I think it is becoming, as you introduced, Claudia, as with these increasing unequal burdens on women in the face of multiple crises, the research on gender is becoming ever more relevant. And so I think that's there's so much amazing research that has been done, and it's becoming now even more critical to build upon that and to kind of see what new facets can be explored. But I think even just the diversity of the agenda of this conference is a testament to that, right? I mean, there's so much amazing research being done that I had a hard time choosing between sessions because there's so many interesting dimensions and aspects all of you are looking at and exploring. And so I think with the question of kind of, is it relevant? I do agree, of course, there's things that could change. And I think we've already been having these discussions. And that's what I think is really great, that we've already seen the steps. Even this gender vision competition showed how much interest there is in innovative approaches and kind of changing even the norms of research, right? Trying to kind of shift the perspectives that we've been working on and finding new avenues, for example, in questioning what are we measuring when we measure empowerment, and whose empowerment and in which contexts, and also in terms of intersectionality becoming increasingly important. So I think it's certainly innovative and ever more relevant.
Okay. Again, a quick follow on, you said relevant. So I guess following in the footsteps of Margaret as well. So to what extent is it relevant to GIZ? I think CGIAR has 9,000 staff. GIZ has
23,000.
23,000. Okay. We have it on record. So Bill.
Yeah, don't quote me, but I think it's around 23,000.
Anyway, more. So, to what extent do you think the 23,000 or thereabouts staff of GIZ and their networks that are obviously different to a large extent from CGIAR's network will be able to use any of the information, the resources? Of course, you might not necessarily have looked in detail into some of the online resources, but are these resources not just relevant? Will they actually be used? Well, what do you think? And actually, again, will you have an ambassadorial role to move this forward? Yeah, if you could just say a bit more about that.
I hope so. And I absolutely think that you highlight a good point. So GIZ actually has an interesting intermediate role. So while it is kind of grouped into as a donor, and it is, but we are also commissioned on behalf of the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development as an implementing agency. And that's why we have such a huge staff worldwide. So in over 150 countries. And that means that a lot of the work that's being done on the ground in countries that you are also working in, that there is a huge opportunity to share this research and actually bring the research forward with the networks that GIZ has, which are broad and diverse. And I think also in terms of the kind of role as a mediator of government as a government agency also enables access to political dialogues that we should absolutely harness and take advantage of more. And I would love to be involved in pushing that. So thanks.
Hey, excellent. So let's move over to Elizabeth. So I think, maybe also just say a few words about your new role. So, I mean, maybe everyone knows, but I came a day late, so I don't know. So, and then maybe how then again, is this relevant what you've heard? How does it link to your own work? Please.
Hi, everyone. So for those who haven't met yet, I'm Elizabeth Garner. I just joined C4ECRAF as the Gender Equity and Social Inclusion Lead, as you mentioned. But actually, I was invited to this event as part of GREAT because my previous position was at Cornell University. So I'm kind of bridging both of those worlds still as I get to know the CG Center. And that role as a Gender Equity and Social Inclusion Lead, which I keep saying over and over again, is really kind of taking over from a few different people, trying to combine those efforts into one position. So it's quite a big position for little old me, and who's getting bigger, but that's okay. So what I'm trying to think about is not only my own projects and research. I'm saying this because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about this too, but not what are my own projects and research niches, but also how can I take the lessons here and share them with the other people who are interested in doing gender work, either as a gender integrator or a gender focused specialist. And so a lot of the resources here are definitely useful that I can take back and share with the rest of C4ECRAF. But I think also bringing in my perspective from the university and sort of my training in women's studies, there were a couple of things that I was really excited about and hearing from people here at the conference over the last couple of days. And the first is just to reiterate what's already been said, is that these crises that we're experiencing are just exacerbating the inequalities that already existed, and while also probably creating some new ones that we haven't even noticed yet. So I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is, especially from the young researchers, this interest and passion about going deeper. It's kind of a theme that I heard from the questions in particular about trying to understand who are we talking about, whether that's intersectionality or going deeper into the household. What do we mean by fill in the blank? You know, how are we questioning our terms so that we really understand what we're talking about and we're being more specific and intentional in the phrasing we're using, like around intersectionality in particular. Thank you, Miranda. And also I had a great conversation with Rachel Voss about, her great presentation from Rachel Voss asking specifically about what is a plot manager and how do you define the plot. I know Elizabeth Bryan is also working on that. And then from the great team too, Aman, Fred and Martha talking about what is masculinity and femininity. And the thing that I got the most out of that is we do not talk enough about what is gender before we assume that we're doing work related to it. And so I think that's also really critical when we're talking about these crises coming in and we're talking about gender inequality. What are we even really talking about? How are we defining inequality? Are we defining gender so we're all on the same page and what we're working towards? And I think that's the other, sorry, I hope I'm not using too much time, but the other thing that I really enjoyed was some of the stock taking. So the original question was about the innovation that we're doing. But I think it's so critical to really understand all the work that's already happened so that we see where the innovation is happening. And also so that we're not reinventing the wheel, especially in times of crises. We don't have time to really do that. We need to be thinking about what works or what has worked and how we can innovate on those proven methods. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and now over to Shreya. If maybe you could also say 2 or 3 words of what you will be working on in your new role.
Hi, so I really was not expecting to speak on these 3 days at all, but I was interested in, it was interesting why I made it to this panel, and I'm very happy that I did, but to bring right now about the question of what I have learned from the last 3 days and whether it's relevant or innovative or not. I'm going to speak from a you perspective as an outsider, as somebody who's seeing a lot of this for the first time. A lot of this is new to me. So rather than speaking to the content of what I've heard, I thought I will speak a little to all the people I have met and the kind of work or the kind of sort of the CG context that I've seen here and heard about in the first 2 days and the last 3 days. So what I thought was, so firstly, I come from a much smaller scale of institution in South Asia. So the kind of experience that I come from is in terms of scale and towards the grassroots, a lot closer to the grassroots. And we also played this role of linking the grassroots with policy, but not quite at the scale. So the lens that I will sort of present is more sort of an appreciation for what I think CG has potential for and would be great if they could build on it. One is, I'm amazed at the challenging disciplinary intersections that I've seen here. So if you see outside when people work on, and funders, when they work on like gender research, they kind of work on these very traditional sectors of, the wash sector or livelihoods or income generation, etc. And here we have people working with vaccinations and breeds, and these intersections are so challenging that sometimes it forces you to look beyond your traditional gender training to ask, how does gender figure here? I think even for gender researchers, this is really a challenge. And I see the group here really sort of rising to that challenge. It's been fascinating for me because a lot of the topics, even I go in wondering, I just went into the room going like, how have they linked it right there? And it's been fascinating for me. And from there, bridging into the rich methods that I have seen in the last 3 days, if this could be like compiled as a resource for young gender researchers out there, sort of entering CG and trying to figure out how these really complex intersectionalities with technologies, etc., work, it would be an amazing resource. Like I would Like there's so much that I cannot get out of reading, like hundreds of literature that I could get from that one booklet. If I could just know what is out there and that I don't have to start building the wheel from scratch, and I would know who to contact for a particular method, and how can I sort of add value for my particular project or modify it for my particular work for that. I think that would be fabulous. The third thing that I thought was really relevant to, I think, the gender context is how gender researchers in CG are embedded within these very multidisciplinary contexts. Usually this single gender researcher surrounded by hydrologists and pathologists and biophysicists and having to constantly look beyond their disciplinary boundaries and speak across disciplines. The gender researchers in this room are also veterinary scientists. They're also like learning about, how genetic mutations work and how breeds are formulated, how hydrology works. Like everyone's learning everything beyond just their disciplinary boundaries. I would love to see the other way around as well. And I think we discussed this in the first 2 days. It would be great if CG could also have people from the other disciplines making the same effort to interact with gender researchers here. And therefore, I think these kind of safe spaces and these spaces of collective, I found was very, very important for the CG. And I think gender research could really take a step up with these kind of collective spaces, because so many of us work in, individually in a space where nobody really understands or appreciates the kind of work that we do all the time. And finally is the sort of the global diversity of contexts that the CG has access to, which I think as a smaller institution, you simply do not have. Instead of trying to bundle all of this into single comparable indices or something, just like if you could just appreciate the geographical and the contextual diversity that is there, the kind of evidence and the sort of the variety of evidence that you can generate in gender research from the CG would be just amazing. And I think it would make people realize the relevance of contextual gender research a lot more than what is possible within sort of uniform spaces. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Nicolene has been taking furtively notes. Yeah, very, very interesting. Also, I think there is a gender expert finder somewhere, but I think we all need to review it and see if we are there, and check the attributes and so forth. Yeah, I do like the idea to better showcase the geographic and interdisciplinary diversity of researchers that are interested and work to any extent on gendered question, gender and intersectionality questions. So back to Margaret. Now comes the critical round. You mentioned conflict. You didn't hear enough about conflict. I was in one session where there was one conflict presentation that was on Nigeria. And obviously a confluence of conflict, climate change, and other things. But the conflict was very big, with farms being burned down, people spending a lot of money on fencing, entire farms being constantly moved and closer to homesteads, to keep something alive. I learned that crops underground survive fires, which is a good idea. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, there is some pretty severe measures that some people have to take to survive conflicts. So what else? Or more on conflict. What else? What do we need to do better? Gender platform, gender researchers. I'm not saying gender researchers interested in dealing with subjects of gender and intersectionality. What more do we need to do?
Yes, maybe I won't focus on conflict alone, but on the turbulences, some of which we haven't even encountered, by the way, by now. It's a time when we have to be ready for anything. What I think we can do more of, and I think I was privileged to attend one session where we talked about some attempt to go into strategies, policies of countries, states, nation states. And I think we need to do more of that, looking at because those are the vehicles of resilience. The CG is sitting up there at the global level, but we see the CG as a leader, a global leader, and I think Nicolene articulated that vision very well, very ably. But we want to know that the interconnectedness of the actors at different levels, the state, the public sector, the civil society, private sector. So really understanding how those other institutions work and having diagnostic tools to find out what are the limitations therein, what are the opportunities there, and what are the frameworks to help us understand issues that can help us respond quickly to the crises that happen. For example, COVID, when it happened, you can see that part of the reason we were able to navigate it were, ICT was very important. We quickly went online, we were able to connect, we were able to share and continue work in some way until, by God's grace, we are now able to meet physically. So having tools that can help us to proactively engage, and again, the gender platform or the CG generally, looking at how we can understand the other systems at the national level, at the, the private sector, at all those levels, as I have said, and therefore proactively having systems in place to help us navigate. So conflict, COVID, and others that we may not know about, I think that's an area that we may need to engage more of. The sessions that analyzed those systems or institutions were looking at policies, strategies, but you could see we could do more in terms of understanding the structures. For example, in Africa, where I come from, policy implementation is a key gap. And you could see that the papers that analyzed strategies fell short of looking at what hinders, what are the barriers for implementation, for example, especially from a gender perspective. So I would love to see more of that engagement. And then while I still have the mic, I had many papers that were looking at national level, such and so in Kenya, in Ghana, in Uganda, and then I kept wondering, what are the national agricultural research systems working on? If the CG is conducting national level studies, you see a gap there. And it's glaring. From the work that we've had we've done training, great training, Sub-Saharan Africa, and now going into South Asia, we discover that national agricultural research systems hire social scientists who are generalists, agriculture economists, sociologists, but not gender experts. It means there is a gap at national level, and therefore the CG is doing what, in my opinion, the national research system could be doing. Can we get evidence that convinces governments to hire genuine gender experts so that the CG can really do what it should do best, which is now at the regional level, at the global level, and we stop to see gender researchers in the CG publishing national level studies. I would love to see more of that.
Yeah, and I think a first step is, to bring in researchers. I mean, as you said, they don't necessarily exist yet, but I think if we create some demand to bring in researchers from national ag research systems and extension systems, bring them into the research, and especially at least the research systems have generally a mandate for publications. We work with a lot of policymakers and other agencies, and they don't have that mandate. So it's actually very difficult to excite them about some of the work, but at least the NARAs have often a mandate. And so, yeah, just create the demand and say, we need you, we need researchers from your system to obviously also the whole outcome and impact pathway, actually, to make research, generate outcomes and impact on the ground. So I think that's great. And then I did hear policy process research on gender. I mean, I know IFPRI has a couple of years back done a few years of policy process research on nutrition policy. Nutrition obviously has really moved from being a side activity to being, I think, front and center now for various reasons. So I think they don't need so much policy process research there anymore. But yeah, I think for gender, especially given this growing inequities, I think it's certainly the right time to do that. And I think we have heard a few things that go towards policy process research, but yeah, I don't think we're there. So I think that's a gap that's very well identified. Over to Hannah. this next, probably final round. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. And I want to pick up on those points. And we've heard a lot of this so far these last few days, but I think two things really stand out and they go hand in hand for me too, is kind of a co-creation that we really need to focus more on bringing impact to the ground, bringing it to the realities requires actually talking to the end users, making sure it's demand-led, making sure that it's a user-centric approach, which I know is done, but I think it really needs to be a bigger focus. And we've heard that in a lot of sessions this week already. And we heard that in the youth panel on our very first day, which really stood out to me too, that yeah, if it's not useful and relevant to the people that we're trying to address, who should be at the center of our research, right? And it shouldn't be only publication outputs, but it should be research for development. And how do we achieve that? And making sure that their voices are heard and amplified, and also kind of integrated very early on in research. I think that's also, we need to make sure that it's not and gender and youth and marginalized groups. It should always be for whom are we working, and of course bringing in this discussion of men and boys, that if we're not including all people, all users, then we might end up in the situation that Alpha mentioned on our first day, that he said if it's not relevant and it won't be continued, it might be kind of taken up in the first year or during project implementation. But if it's not continued, then that's not the impact at scale that CGIAR is trying to reach, I think. And going along with that, and kind of following on what Margaret has already mentioned, is the really important role of partnerships. And I know that's becoming a much bigger thing in One CGIAR as well. But I think also going back to this co-creation is also the question of where does the role of CGIAR end, and not necessarily end, but kind of what is a way to really make sure that the research gets not only taken up with partnerships, for example, GIZ and NGOs and other development organizations, but also in national systems, to make sure that the research is also continued and also strengthened locally and able to make a difference in terms of national and local policies. And another part of that, I think, is also kind of partnership and participation of beyond production level. And this is also kind of across land, water, and livestock systems, that making sure that the partners we're working with are not only in breeding, for example, thank you, but also along the value chain, and making sure that we're intentionally targeting partnerships much further along in the impact chain. Thank you.
You have to be youthful to be useful. And partnerships and participation. Yeah, so from the triple C's to the triple P's to I think achieve impacts and outcomes. And if I understand correctly, our entire session is going to end soon, or was that? Okay, so we will have to speed up. We started quite late, but yes, that gives you about 2 minutes and 2 minutes.
The young people on the panel no, I'm just kidding. So I just want to say how grateful I am that we are on a panel together, because I think we're all complementing each other really well. One of the things, and grateful that you've made a lot of the comments that I've been thinking about as well, but one of the things that has really stood out to me is along the lines of what is the role of the CG, is also, are we thinking about what are the expertise that we bring to the table? Because along with the point I made earlier about trying to look deeper into, say, the household, for example, are we thinking about those community level partnerships to actually help us address inter-household dynamics, people who have been on the ground for a really long time, that have those partnerships, that have that relationship with the community? Who are we to have our ag extension agent go in there to act as a marriage counselor, for example, as we try to become more engaged with gender transformative approaches? So I think this critical self-reflexivity of who are we and what is the CG, for example, what is the role that we play, is really important. And similarly, I also would provide for some of the presentations that I saw. I also think we all need to consider the research that's already being done outside of agriculture, outside of the value chains that we're looking at, especially for these topics. If we have interest in inter-household dynamics, for example, are we looking at disciplines like human development and family studies that already have a lot of this research completed and theories in place that we can then think about how we can interact with that rather than recreating the wheel. So I think it's really important for us to think about, especially as time and resources become very critical, just reflection on how we're doing that. And just one last point about the scale of research, because I think that ties into what is the sweet spot of the knowledge that we're creating. Because I think I saw a lot of studies that were either too big to go really in depth or too small to really make big claims. And also a lot of people using the same tools without, and I'm not sure if those tools have been purposefully validated also. So can we integrate that more into our methods before we start scaling methods as well?
Okay, great. And yeah, over to Shreya for the last word. So, and while she takes the mic, so I think I heard the need for reflection, in the near term on what is the role of this CG in making a transformative difference, I think, on gender. And what do we bring to the table, and what, and then how does this puzzle and mosaic, there's a piece that CG brings, what does everyone else bring? And then how can we make a difference? And again, also methods and tools. I think this resource hub will hopefully help us ensure that we build on others' work and share tools and resources. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Shreya, please.
Okay, so this question I will take more from an us perspective because as very much a part of the CG research group now, I don't think it's a you anymore, and I would very much like to be a part of where it can go. And I think what I won't call it gaps, but sort of opportunities that are there for the future. So one thing, when I was told about the 3 C's or the crises, I've more recently started finding it difficult to think in terms of individual crisis, rather to start thinking in terms of uncertainty. That, like, for example, when it comes to droughts and floods, etc., where we used to talk about drought-prone areas and flood-prone areas, these days droughts and floods are happening in the same region within a month of each other, right? So we are not living in a space of where we have to respond to individual crises. I think the world has now come to a space where we need to start talking about whether you're prepared for any kind of uncertainty. And I think it would be great if gender research could start talking not in terms of climate change or so-and-so crisis, but how is gender studies, methods, and the evidence poised to deal with uncertainty and where it's going to go in the future. So I heard the futures sort of narrative in the method when we are talking about youth, but gender relations are also going to change. So there may be a requirement to stop thinking about traditional gender frameworks alone and start thinking about where it could go from here. So I was hearing a paper today on how, the minute investment comes into a particular crop, men come and take it over. So your old sort of distinctions between, how gender frameworks are decided traditionally may not work. So as the markets change, as what becomes profitable changes, as what becomes risky changes over time, how this is going to function with traditional gender frameworks is going to change. So I think that is a real opportunity to start thinking in terms of uncertainty rather than this crisis and that crisis. The other thing that, this is again something that's much larger, but has been in my head ever since Claudia gave her first speech, and she said that more gender inequality is going to lead to more hunger. And I see that we've started to shift the narrative from scarcity will lead to inequality or lack of development leads to inequality, and shifted the narrative to inequality leads to this. So to stop looking at inequality as an outcome, which is merely a moral prerogative of the world to, deal with in the words of justice, but rather start looking at inequality as a driver of the problems that we have. And if there can be more evidence to prove that, because we keep talking about gender vulnerability as an outcome of every problem of the world, and we are not looking at it as the reason why the problem exists in the first place. And the same thing goes for climate change as well. Injustice is not an outcome of climate change. It's why climate change is happening. And if our future research could start shifting that narrative, that I think would be really strong, where equity is not a possible later outcome that we work towards, but is a solution itself, where equity becomes the solution. So you don't get to talk about climate mitigation without dealing with equity first. So I think that is a real direction that I think CG and us as researchers can take up as a challenge. And my last point is in terms of opportunities, can we think of being more than innovators? Like, we are constantly innovating, but there's so much innovation that's happening bottom up. Can we do, there are various ways in which you can talk to innovation. You can be the innovator yourself. You can also be the person who recognizes other innovations that are already happening and gives it support, gives it a space, gives it voice, a platform. You could sort of support it in terms of finding, you know, other spaces. You could be the inspiration for other kinds of innovations coming up. So I remember when today in the morning we were doing a tapestry of innovations to say that it's not like a single innovation is relevant everywhere for everybody. And what is innovative depends on where you come from. So I found today, these 3-day session, very innovative because I haven't heard any of this before. But I'm sure there's tons and tons of literature, and all of you who have been doing this for a long time don't find a lot of this new, but I find it innovative because I haven't come from this space. So just because you've already done something does not mean that it's not innovative. Just speak to somebody new and you will realize that you're being innovative, because then you've sort of spoken to more people about the same thing and somebody else finds it innovative. So are there new ways of engaging with innovation? And can we think of innovation in patches, you know, and not like one innovation that takes over the world, but different innovations valid for different people? I see Vivian's jacket and I keep seeing all of these patches of color, and it really reminds me of the patches of innovation we did outside. It's everywhere. Can we think differently about innovation?
Okay, on this, what I believe, very high note, please, thanks to our panelists. I'm saying high note because I really like those directives we were given, I think, by Shreya. You know, talk to someone new, to someone you have never interacted with, to researchers, to policymakers, to agencies who might not yet engage in gender research and research on gender intersectionality. Explain to them how inequity and inequality and injustice are really a lot of the causes of the ills that we see nowadays. There's a lot of work on certainly conflict, war, famine. I think there's one-to-one relationship in terms of inequity and inequality. And also, you said uncertainty, but I think resilience, you know, resilience to some extent, at least we have some frameworks and some analytical frames. Yeah, rather than individual crisis, we talk about resilience. So we need, and again, social, but also ecological resilience and many more resiliences. So again, we bring things together from a biophysical and a social point of view. And yeah, and I think with this, I'm maybe handing over to Vivian. Thanks so much again to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And continue appreciating our panelists. So we'll be wrapping up in just about, say, 45 minutes. So let me invite our next group of, I don't want to call them panelists, but we have a few of us whom we invited to join us in this conference, in this science exchange, because they are early career scientists and we gave them a travel grant. So we just want to hear from them. So welcome, Subransu, right here from IFPRI. We also have Esther Achandi from ILRI, Francois from the Alliance, and then Faridul from IMI. Oh, wildfish, sorry. Sorry about that. I don't know whether you prefer to sit or you want to come and use this. Any is okay. You're still energetic. Anyway, so we just want to pick their minds and to get a few, some of their perspectives, and probably they picked up things from the 3 days that we've been here. So we want to hear more about that. So my first question, and if I may start with Faridul, what are the main ideas that are buzzing in your head after these 3 days?
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. So first thing is actually the first, in the inauguration day, actually I heard one sentence, that is CGIAR has a strength, and that strength is we have 33 initiatives. And if these initiatives works collectively, we will be able to make a big change, bigger change. So like collaboration and cooperation within the institutions of CGIAR and using the strength of CG, that is the buzzing word I am actually really impressed with. And before joining here, I didn't realize that CG has that kind of strength. So we should like focus on utilizing this strength, I would say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Branso, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. Before going into like what is still buzzing in my head, I just want to mention one thing, the opportunity. I mean, I'm sure like RAs like me in the CG system would agree to it, because this opportunity of being with all of you, I mean, I find myself like fortunate to be sharing the spaces with you, because to everyone that I spoke in the last 3 days, it's more like, I mean, these are the ideas that I could take back and apply in somewhere that is actually, because I am someone who is involved in the groundwork, and we are going into the field, looking at the real life scenarios and all the researches, I mean, the outputs, the tools, the methods, that's going to help us like unpacking at so many levels. I mean, that is something that I found really interesting. And I mean, I would like to thank all of you, the organizing committee, and who made all the efforts for us, and just to give us the opportunity to look at people, listen to them, because that is actually where like early career researchers like us is going to go ahead, and maybe someday we'll share spaces with you at your level as well. That's what I think. Thanks.
No levels. Okay, Francois.
When we are talking about early career, that brought me to reflect on my personal background. I started getting into gender research after a training I get from GREAT in 2017. When I went back home, my colleagues and my classmates was asking me, are you getting into gender because you are looking for job opportunities? Then that really was shocking. I was a little bit shocked from that perspective towards myself as someone who is looking for job opportunities, because agronomist was not enough, because my background was agronomist. Being a male agronomist involving to change gender was a little bit confusing for people. So that brought me at the same time to challenge myself, proving that I'm not someone who is looking for job opportunities, but someone who's working for something he's interested in and passionate about. Then late in 2019, I get my first gender paper published. And then I said, now I'm a gender researcher. But reflecting on today's session, I was looking from different sessions. I say, am I really a gender researcher? And then I come to realize that learning is not an end itself, but it's a process that will never end. And then I think from this session, I go back home with skills, new idea, new concept towards gender that will help me again to build my knowledge and to shape my gender capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Esther.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity, first of all. And it's just been such a pleasure meeting everyone. Some we've worked online on bits and pieces here and there, but also as a gender researcher, as an early career gender researcher, I've had the opportunity of having a former supervisor in the same room as my current supervisor, which has been very interesting because it's not something that happens often, that you meet, that you have someone whom you were with before and someone that you're with right now. And I think for me, reflecting on my own journey as someone that's in gender, I'm probably in gender out of interest. It's not something that I studied outrightly, but it's something that I've always held close to my heart from a young age. And I was sharing with someone just my gender journey, that it's been pieces and bits and pieces of how you speak out for gender issues in your own space as a child. And even your teachers just look at you and say, oh, we think you want to be a politician. My teachers thought I would be a politician. And now maybe I'm in the gender politics. Yeah, but what's buzzing through my head after all these days is that there's been a wealth of research shared. And I've met a number of you whose work I've read, researchers from within ILRI, those from CGIAR Biodiversity, those from IFPRI, with the Women Empowerment in Agriculture Index, which I used to write my dissertation. Meeting them in person, you're like, okay, so we are in the same group. We are in the same room with people whose research have been just reading and thinking, oh my goodness, they're up there. So yeah, whatever you do inspires someone else. You may be having sleepless nights and investing your time, but that resource that you bring out, it's an inspiration to someone else, and they'll use that resource and also step into those shoes. So you're inspiring generations. Keep doing what you're doing, keep excelling the way you're excelling, and I'm very delighted to be a part of you. Thank you.
And we are so happy that you are a part of it and you won. She actually shared with me that as of last night, sorry to share. She had written to Owen asking to withdraw from the competition, but so keep going. I think that's what I hear from you. So I think, Francois, you attempted to answer my second question because I was asking how you're going to apply everything you've had and learned once you go back to your institution. I don't know if you still want to add something to it, or if you do, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I could not single one thing, but I think the whole things build all the capacity. But when I was reflecting for one session on GPA plus session, gender-based analysis plus, that brought me to understand that not only gender identity matter in terms of looking inequalities or empowerment as well. Even women is with different identities that you could not really look at women as women. Even women, they are not in the same basket. They are diverse in terms of identity. You could see women as from different perspective, from welfare to poverty to everything. I think that brought me to understand that not only gender identity matter, that concept. Secondly, another thing that was today, this morning session, when we were talking about empowerment, there is a question that was raised, how you define empowerment, how you translate in your local language empowerment. And I thought, how can I translate empowerment in my local language? Was really challenging. People may understand it differently, and the way they may understand it differently will affect the way you will deal with that issue. Yeah, that's also another thing that we need to consider. Of course, we don't have one answer for it, but still it's a process that we could look at to define this person is empowered or not. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So Bransel?
Yeah, I would like to add like how it's going to, like we are going to take back something home and start applying in our own work. So one particular session where we were speaking about intra-household bargaining power and how the methods that we have used there, it was explaining something more that we couldn't capture in the quantitative work. So that is actually something that's actually going to be very instrumental for us going back. And when we were struggling to find out reasons for why we couldn't find anything, what was the difference and why couldn't we able to do it. And I think now those are those methods that might be we were missing at that point of time. But going back from here, like the application of those tools, methods, and how do you interpret all those things, that's going to really add value to the research work that's going on, we are doing on the field. So yeah, I mean, that's something that stood out for me, and that's it's still in my head, that how am I gonna go back and start exploring more on those things.
Let's motivate him. Okay. Let's hear from Faridu. Same question. And probably as you tell us how you're going to apply it, also add in, maybe you had a wow moment or an aha moment throughout these 3 days that you want to share with us.
Okay, for the application thing, maybe that one needs a kind of background. So I studied gender and I'm working for gender. It's been like around 15 years I have been working. So thing is like what I am doing actually, working with gender, what does it mean? Like I am designing activities, doing capacity building things for both men and women, getting women connected with different forward and backward market actors. So different things are going on, contributing to gender-based, reduce gender-based violence. So like what is happening? What's the outcome? So I think actually I am working to address power relation between men and women. So in order to apply the learning of this workshop, I would say in the beginning of the workshop, I heard two things, maybe from Claudia or Nicholas or someone, I forgot the name, but thing is, they said we have to be focused on impact and solution, how we can make better impact. So this is the thing which will actually drive me further. And the solution, experience, brainstorming, and teamwork actually. These are the, so far I understand, these are the like core factor behind identifying a solution. And at the same time, we have to have a kind of mindset to replicate things. So this implication, impact, and solution, these are the core things which will be actually the driving things. And you had another point is like, what was the wow moment? It's difficult to say because so like all the 3 days, number of things happened and I found like, wow. So coming to the ILV campus, it makes me, wow, how beautiful it is. Seeing Vivian presenting and moderating, it makes me, wow. Our photographer took the group photo from the top of the roof. The style was, wow. So like these are the things makes me wow. But behind this, I would say like in a session on masculinity and femininity, we got number of features associated with good men and good woman. So someone was asking like, let's combine the features and kind of make an inventory kind of thing, like the common features of like both men and women, which will give you a kind of understanding about, or we can like start brainstorming from that stage that these are the features. And for this, we have been like investing our resources. That means time and brain and other resources as well. So that's it about the wow moments. Thank you.
Great. I'm tempted to come to Esther at the far end to hear about your wow moments. I guess you've been to the campus before, so I'll.
So I'll join him. The campus was like my big wow moments. You know, as you enter the gate, you're like, oh, these guys did give me a contract. Wow. Yeah, so that was like a big wow moment. The other wow moment is that this is like my first really big meeting since we emerged from the COVID pandemic. So my main audience as I'm working has been my kids in the kitchen. So seeing you all is like a big wow moment. Yeah, so yeah, that's how it's been. But then also meeting fellow researchers, what they're working on, very interesting ideas. You feel like you could pick everything, but then again, I remember, I have to stay focused. I have to remember to ground my research in theory and build on the theory. They're coming from my theory. That's why they're building something. So I need to really ground my research. So I think that's been also a point of just knowing that there's so much going on, so much that's been done, but how can I continue to ground my gender research in theory and build onto that? Thank you very much.
So Branso, let me come to you.
Yeah. So my wow moment was actually meeting the Provea team, because it's like I've been working on those like since last 3 years on that. And when I always used to think like, what was the thought process behind, because I'm a very like quant person, like how do they define those indexes? What was the weight they have assigned? And I mean, so yeah, the wow moment for me is actually meeting the Provea team, and those names I always used to see in the references. But I get to, so it's like putting a picture to those names, because thanks to the pandemic, we have never met. I mean, we didn't get a chance to meet like this in person. So yeah, I'm to be very objective, that was my wow moment. But I would like to agree with everyone else, like coming to the ILRI campus and the way the campus is, the weather, and especially when I'm coming from India, the weather is something, it's like, wow, it feels good here. Yeah. So yeah, thank you.
I'm sure Ranjita agrees, having had to move back to India. Anyway, so thank you so much, Francois. Yes, I haven't forgotten you. Save the best for last. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think reflecting on those sessions that the flow we had, I feel like they are not only giving new insight, but also I like the approach that has been used to be able to allow people to bring both contradicting, and complementing idea to come on the table. That was really something unique that could be done either virtually or you could learn from paper reading. That's something that's really very unique for it. Secondly, I think when I remember the time I was applying for this gender vision, of course, I said to her, when am I going to having my French background and also not really having, I was looking from that barrier that I would not be able to make it. But I come to realize that this moment helped to overcome all our barrier and background and feel comfortable to contribute efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the four of you, Faridul, Subransu, Francois, and Esther. So thank you very much for having agreed to share your reflections with us. And I'm sure that even before you get home, I should have asked I don't know how you got here, but driving from the airport, was there a wow moment going up there? Anyway, the expressway. For those who've been to Nairobi before, it used to take even an hour to get to the airport, but now 15 minutes or less. So yes, so thank you very much. You can have your seats. Okay, I'd like to move us along, and I had actually ignored this side. So now let me address this side. I hope you're awake. Okay, so my wow moment was to see our collective efforts, and we had Harriet, who has been helping us to visualize that. And I just want to give her 3 minutes so that she can tell us what came out of the farm. Harriet? Edwin, is it here?
While he's setting it up, just to say that you guys did such an amazing job this morning. Maybe that was my wow moment, seeing all of your wonderful pictures. I think you're getting better. If you keep on practicing every morning, you're going to do my job next time. So it should say closing. Presentations JVC. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Is that working? Edward? Oh, you'll do it for what there? Okay, cool. Great. So, well, you've had a look up outside. Just to say that today your pictures were so beautiful that I decided I wasn't going to draw my own. I was going to use your pictures to illustrate the last section of our big picture, which is looking forward. And I hope, here we go. So I'm just going to really quickly run you through. I counted how many pictures there were in each theme, and there were 5 themes that came out very strongly this morning in your vision for the future and what we need to do for this farm. And this was number 1. 33 people drew pictures around involving more people in the farm, young and old, youth, entrepreneurs, private sector, government, not only in research, but also in research coordination, and also up on that watchtower in leadership and policy. So that's something that's coming out really strongly from this group. Fabulous. The second most popular theme was cross-pollination, integrated research, partnerships, mentoring by senior staff. Very strongly, we need to get off the farm and look at all the other areas around processing, marketing of farm activities, diversity and interdisciplinarity, technology to support our goals, climate friendly, gender and socially inclusive, ICT, all very important. Secure and sustainable funding came in equal with technology. And finally, we had the flying fish. The flying fish, I don't know who you are, but you're encouraging us all to think big and attempt extraordinary things. And I think that's a really lovely way to finish our picture. So here we are. Here's our big picture. I hope you enjoyed your morning sessions. I hope they gave you a chance to as we said, just to pause, reflect a little bit, look at the situation in a slightly different way, and maybe understand your work as it fits into that bigger picture of the platform and the CGIAR farm, who you are, how you are, and where you're going. So I hope you've gained something from the process, and I hope that it's been a lot of fun. And I just want to say it's been a real privilege to spend these 3 days with you. I've learned so much. I've been so inspired by everyone that I've talked to, and I'm definitely signing up to the newsletter so I can follow your progress in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think she deserves 3 wows or. So now we are wrapping up, and we just want to get your feedback from the entire 3 days. Some of you have been here probably from Monday, but let's look at the science exchange. So we have a Menti, Edwin, for you. So I'm going to give you a